I have had one of the most interesting days I think like personally I've ever experienced. It's a weird way of describing it, but I don't really know how else to describe it. I woke up very early this morning because I think I'm starting to get an onset of insomnia. I think it was passed down to me from my mother. I don't know if that's specifically how it works. I don't want to put credence into that, but I have a theory that might be what's happening. But I was up at like 6 o'clock, and I went to bed at like 1 that night, so it was like that's not good sleep. But I got up early, uh, and earlier today I got fired from a job that I was working uh, remotely. I was doing an online job. They have not told me why. Um, I don't really have much of an inkling why I was fired. And I made really good money off of it too, but I haven't been able to make enough to have like a good foundation to bounce off of. I'm kind of in dire straits, and I have been in dire straits for the better part of really since last year. I've been in a really shitty financial place. But what I have done over that time is I have been reading Homestuck. I have been reading Homestuck intensely. Now, I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you know what Homestuck is. If you don't, I advise you to click off of this video and go find the unofficial Homestuck, the unofficial Homestuck collection on archive. It shouldn't be that hard to find. Um, but uh, I've been reading this story for I almost want to say almost a year now. And as of today, I have finished reading Homestuck. I have no plans on continuing. I have no plans on reading the epilogues or indulging in Beyond Canon because, from what I have heard, they fuck everything about the story up. And I'm already like head over heels for this, and I'll tell you why later. But I don't think, when I look at the creative decisions for Beyond Canon, especially, it feels to me like Hussey almost let it happen so that it would prove that he was right about the fandom and how they felt about Homestuck. Because let me tell you something. The fandom for Homestuck is one of the most hateful communities I've ever seen. Not in a traditional sense, but in the sense that it seems they have very little actual love and enjoyment for Homestuck as a piece of art. They seem to like Homestuck as a concept. They seem to like Homestuck more as this ephemeral, fandomized vision of something that, like, this is such an important work. Like, that's what Homestuck is to these people. There's actually very few people who truly, I think, appreciate Homestuck as a piece of art. Um, and Andrew Hussey pretty much predicted all of this with the character Caliborn. Now, I'm about to get into some spoiler territory, so yeah, if you haven't clicked off because you haven't read Homestuck, please, 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 please click off. I'm begging you to read Homestuck before you watch this video. Caliborn is a very interesting character. Like many ways that Hussey plays with the concept of an alien, Caliborn is a unique play on an alien in that he is completely foreign to the concept of what human art is. He is kind of mimicking it in a very poor, distasteful way. He doesn't care about art. Caliborn is not a passionate person about art. He doesn't have any passion for what other people make. He doesn't have any passion for other people. He doesn't care about other people. He's one of the most hateful creatures that have ever been. You know, like, I think I would argue that, like, even Eridan has redeeming qualities. But Caliborn was always doomed to be a villain, and it's very funny that Homestuck has gone down this path that it has when Andrew Hussey spent so much time critiquing the exact way that Homestuck is now being treated. But of course, if the majority of people wouldn't be treating Homestuck this way if they had actually read it. Because, spoiler alert, Homestuck is possibly one of the greatest pieces of art a human being has ever made. I say that without exaggeration. You could say I'm very biased, but I don't care. Homestuck has been regarded as one of the very last true postmodern works of fiction. And I consider it to be the most ambitious piece of fiction that has been written by just some guy. When I started Homestuck, I kind of had an inkling of what I was getting into. Mind you, I don't think I could have ever predicted how far things would spiral. That's the constant of if you're actually reading Homestuck, is that you're always going to, no matter how you get into Homestuck, you're always going to underestimate Homestuck. You're always going, it's always going to exceed your expectations. So like I began Act 1 being like, it's very funny, very, very cheeky, and very of its time. And that will remain as such. But there is a thing to be said about how Homestuck, regardless of its sort of time capsule nature, that it is still such a timeless piece of work. Purely because nothing does what Homestuck does. There is not a single piece of work. There are works that have taken inspiration from Homestuck, but nothing that has ever reached the fucking insanity that Homestuck is. Alright? And I have a bone to pick with people. Again, the fandom, of course, because a lot of people don't seem to have appreciation for Act 6, possibly, to me, the most important act of the entire comic. Most important act. And people seem so dismissive of it. Now, why? I really want to understand why people are so dismissive. I've heard that, like, it takes a strange turn that, like, sort of messes with the tone. But if you're expecting fiction to have a consistent tone throughout, you are a boring person inherently. That is such a boring way to interface with art. It is so mind-numbingly stupid that would be even something you would consider, because that is a Western fiction. That is a Western fiction trope, that things have to have like a consistent tone, and most things in the West don't even follow that. So the fact that people have been sold on this fucking lunacy that everything everything fictional should have a consistent tone, garbage, stupid, and you're wrong. I have heard people complain that Act 6 um sort of does a lot of like, people seem more confused by Act 6, and I can tell you why. It's because a lot of people don't really know what to do when Homestuck starts becoming postmodern, because this comes immediately after uh, Act 5, which, by all intents and purposes, is probably the most, like, palatable act of Homestuck. You know, the first 4 acts before Act 5, you know, it's kind of like this slow burn to, like, the real shit. You're kind of getting this slow burn buildup of introducing all of the main 4, and then trinkling in some of the trolls, and a little bit of non-linear storytelling, of course. And then, you know, people love Act 5 because, one, it has the trolls. Everyone is obsessed with the trolls. Most people in the fandom haven't actually read anything other than Act 5. And 2, they like that it combines all of the Homestuckian traits in a rather palatable package. It has all of the non-linear storytelling that all sort of wraps up into a nice, neat package. They like the fact that you can kind of get a feel for what's you can kind of get a feel for what's going on without, like, kind of scratching your head at, like, what are you doing? And, like, Act 6 is all about that. It is all about subverting your expectations. It's all about taking whatever you thought about Homestuck. Okay, Act 6 does 2 things. It takes everything you thought Homestuck was and does everything it possibly can in its nature to subvert and completely just decimate whatever you thought Homestuck was. 2, it takes every tiny little micro selection of any concept or idea that was presented in any number of the 5 previous acts, and it finds any possible way it can to tie everything back together, but not in a entirely satisfying way, more so in a way that, I don't know, to me it feels right, but I can see why people would be confused, because it is not a it is like, I consider the end of, like, Act 6, you know, with Act 7 and all that in the finale to be extremely satisfying. I don't think there is a more satisfying ending to a piece of fiction ever. But I can see how everything coming up to that feels like, especially when you get into Caliborn's like Homestuck sections, uh, and just like all these other tangents, which are kind of the comic turning its head back to you and being like, what is this comic? What is Homestuck to you? Andrew Hussey seems to kind of inadvertently ask that many times throughout Act 6. That seems to be the distinct question of what is Homestuck? What is it supposed to be? Is it a webcomic? Is it a flash animation? Is it an anime? There was a stretch in the latter half of Act 6 before the game over sequence that was basically an episode of Dragon Ball Z. Um, uh, and I think the answer that Andrew Hussey ultimately comes to is that Homestuck is just, it is what it is. It Act 6 is the intent to prevent Andrew Hussey's work from being pigeonholed into the same predictable schlock that most fandoms will glomp onto. And that's why, of course, people in the Homestuck fandom mostly haven't actually read Homestuck. I cried multiple times during the latter half of Act 6 and Act 7. There was, I mean, it was just fucking. There was a lot of shit in there, because I remember, man, when I first saw Cascade at the end of Act 5 and going into Act 6, dude, like, Cascade is like one of those once in a lifetime experiences, and somehow I never thought it would happen. But Act 6 has multiple animations that completely just... Dude, I don't remember what it was called, but there's a part in Act 7, I think, that is one of the most beautifully animated parts first of all, it is like the most gorgeous animated part of Homestuck, period. And he like saves it for he saves it for last, obviously. But that, I think, has like transcended every single piece of art I've ever... That's not true, though. I still think that, like, everything I compare in art always gets compared to Soundtracks for the Blind by Swans. And I think Homestuck is, like, just barely, like, up there. I had an out-of-body experience to the end of Homestuck. I felt my soul leave my body temporarily. When I saw the frog, it was specifically when the frog in the new universe being created, like, it was zooming in to that frog. And I remember specifically the sensation of my soul being pulled out of my body. This piece of art that a human being created was a religious experience to me. It is likely that I will reread Homestuck sometimes every now and then. But I'm kind of settling into this, and I'm trying to fucking just feel it, because I know I'm never gonna feel like this ever again, because I've had the wildest fucking emotional whiplash from pure hopelessness of, oh fuck, I'm literally right back to where I just started, and like I'm fucked financially, to I have had the most euphoric experience I've ever had with a piece of art since the first time I was on my bed playing Minecraft and listening to Soundtracks for the Blind by Swans. Terezi is such a tragic character. Most of these characters are tragic because this story inherently is about people losing everything. But in that losing, they get the opportunity to rebuild something better because they have all these new friendships. They have all this new insight into the universe. They have all this new insight into who they thought they were and who they want to become. Dave Strider got to have a familial connection that didn't feel like he was walking on eggshells.
It's ready whenever you are.
Okay. In the end, I think the only person who I don't think ever got that good of an end was Gamzee Makara. You know, most people in the story were able to find something or someone that completed them. I think, because like Gamzee Makara's story is so fucking sad to me because it is such a literal, raw expression of what many things, what addiction can do to you, what isolation can do to you, what like what like obsession and fucking like sort of misanthropic like zealotism can do to you. Because like Aradia and Gamzee are like mirrors to each other, because Aradia had the pressure of the world grinding down into her, and she responded by cutting a hole out of the world and slipping out and finding a way to settle and finding peace in death. Like, she died, whatever the hell that means in this universe, and she found peace. And in that sense, she became immortal and she became whole again. Gamzee never got there. Gamzee was sedated constantly on his own supply of like a drug that basically like just like killed him. And then when he started to run out of his supply, and when a series of events that caused him to have a crisis of faith, he went mad. He had a complete psychotic episode, and he and like nobody was able to be there for him because he was so isolated, so incredibly isolated. Like the only person that was really there for him was Carcat. And even then, Carcat wasn't able to stop him. And he killed 2 people and then basically lived the rest of his time in the comic as a sort of weird transcendental pariah that just kind of appears every now and then. I don't know. Yeah, Gamzee is just like a really sad character. Terezi too. Terezi did, I think, find peace in the end, like most people did. But Terezi's arc has gotta be one of the most agonizing things to read. Terezi, because like, I don't know. I'm gonna be real. I'm like in love with Terezi, and I think, reading so many of these parts of Homestuck where Terezi is just suffering and just going through some of the most horrible fucking things that a person can go through, and to the point where like you feel for her when you feel like this feeling of like nothing I do can ever be enough to like help people. It's like fuck, man. And Vriska too. Well, Vriska just like, I think I compared Vriska to Asuka from Evangelion before. I think it's an apt comparison. She's like Asuka from Evangelion, like 5 times over. The borderline personality disorder is like through the fucking roof with this girl. Then she goes fucking through it too, man. But in the end, she rises up. She takes responsibility for the things that she's done, and she burdens the responsibility to lead an army. And Carcat, man. Carcat is one of the most misunderstood characters ever. Because that's another thing with Beyond Canon. Why would you make him like a badass? He's Carcat is a softie, man. He's such a fucking like. Even in the final fight, he can barely fight. He's not a fighter. He like no matter how much he wants to be a fighter, no matter how much he aspires to be as such, he just can't do it because he cares too much about people. He cares too much about like life. He cares too much to hurt anyone because like in the end he is terrified that he's going to lose everyone. You know, he's such a hard ass to everyone because he wants to make sure that everybody gets in gear because it's like serious shit. And if he loses anyone, like he won't be able to handle it. He could like he was freaking the hell out like during the massacre. I could go on forever, but I can't believe it's over. I can't believe I finished Homestuck, and I can't believe that there's nothing more to read now. I wonder if there's other good fan content. I'll probably just have to go and see. But man. Shit, man. Peace, man.